The people of God had been in slavery for 400 years. For 400 years, they woke up in the morning and they wondered, had God forgotten about them? I can't imagine what that would be like for them to ask their grandfathers, was it like this when you were a kid? And they would look at them and say, yeah. In fact, it was like that when my grandfather was a kid. We've been slaves in Egypt forever. 400 years. Eventually, there's a guy by the name of Moses. Moses is raised up as a leader in a pretty unorthodox way. I don't have time to share the story of Moses with you other than just to simply share that God asked him to go and free his people that had been enslaved for 400 years. And so he shows up and he has a face-to-face with Pharaoh himself. Now, Pharaoh doesn't relent at the beginning. Pharaoh says, no, there's 2.5 million of you, and that's a pretty great free labor force. So I'm not interested in letting you go. I'm also not interested in listening to some guy who's been living in the wilderness the last 40 years, just like a chilling, like hanging out with sheep, and you're gonna show up thinking you're the leader of all these people. Like, I'm not interested in listening to you either. And so there's some tension that exists, but eventually Pharaoh changes his mind and says, get out. All of you, get out. And so they do. They leave. Now, it's not long after they leave that Pharaoh changes his mind again and says, what am I doing? I should not have done that. We need to get them back. And so he sends his entire army with him himself, and they chase after the Israelites. The people of God, on the way, on their march of freedom, go into what they assume and what God has said to be a promised land. And in that moment, they're like, man, this is gonna be so good. They get to the Red Sea. They hear the Egyptian army coming up from behind them. And it's like, oh, this is not good. You see, we were going to chill by the Red Sea, but now we are between rock and hard place. They're standing there and they're like, what? Why in the world? And in fact, they even look at Moses and say, is this the plan? Like, did you bring us into the desert out here because there weren't enough graves in Egypt to hold all the bodies? Is that why you brought us out here? And in that moment, God does a miracle. There's a strong east wind that blows through the night. And the result of that miracle is the entire nation of Israel crosses the Red Sea on dry ground. And the army of the Egyptians chase them. And as they get into the middle of the Red Sea, God closes the waters. National Geographic's done documentaries diving in the Red Sea, and they have found so many Egyptian chariot wheels and artifacts. It's wild. They get to the other side. They celebrate like, did you believe what God just did? Like, that is wild. But what happened didn't just stay with them. It spread all over. The people of God were getting ready to enter into this promised land, a land that would provide for them, a land that would be theirs, a land that they could honestly call home. The problem was there were some faith issues. There was some questioning of God in this process of making it to the promised land. And in doing so, God made a decision. He said, you're going to wander for 40 more years. I won't give you the land. And so for 40 years, they wander around in circles in the desert just outside of the border of the promised land. Moses is leading them that entire time, but part of Moses' punishment is he also is not allowed to lead them into the promised land. He's never allowed to step foot in it. And so he gives way in leadership of the people of God to a guy named Joshua. And Joshua is raised up as a leader by Moses. Joshua is a man of faith. Joshua is doing an incredible job taking the reins from Moses. Moses relinquishes his leadership in the greatest, most like, when you think about revering someone who's stepping out of a role, he does an incredible job with it. He realizes he made a huge mistake with God, and he in a very humble posture says, you're right, and I accept your punishment, and I give my blessing to Joshua. Joshua is now leading the people. Part of Joshua's plan as they cross the Jordan into the promised land is to send a couple of spies into the cities that occupy the land God has given them. So there's going to be conflict. It's not just open land flowing with milk and honey that they can just go and set up their nation and everything's fine. Other people have moved into this land, and so they got to do something about it. So he sends spies to go and check out the cities. In particular, he says, I want you to spend significant time in Jericho. And Jericho was the most famous of the cities that they needed to figure out a way to overcome because Jericho's walls were ridiculous. There's archaeological evidence if you were to go to the former city of Jericho. The modern city of Jericho has moved just a little bit, about half a mile. But if you go to the ancient city of Jericho, you find evidence of these enormous walls. In fact, there was 2 sets of walls they found. There's a wall, and then there's this mud embankment. So it's like 15 feet to get over the first wall, and then this huge mud embankment that's super steep. And then you get another set of walls that goes up 25, 30 feet. And so for an army to overtake that, it just wasn't happening. And so people that had previously wanted to take Jericho, you couldn't do it with force over the walls. You had to try a siege, but they were so well equipped for a siege, people didn't have the time. And so the city just simply stood firm. So he sends 2 spies to Jericho and says, figure out, there's got to be a way. God's got to have a way for us. And so they go into the city. When they go into the city, they find a place to stay. And the normal place to stay for foreigners, if they did not have family in that city, would be in the place or the residence of a prostitute. That prostitute's name is Rahab. Now, you didn't necessarily have to participate in prostitutional activities to stay at a prostitute's house. They also just had rooms for rent. Bible doesn't tell us what they did other than they went to that house to stay. Now, the king heard that there were 2 foreigners from the nation of Israel in his city. And so immediately he's like, let's find those jokers. What are they doing? And so he starts trying to find them, and they're looking for him. And then he hears that they went to the house of Rahab, the prostitute. And so he immediately goes and says, I want an audience with Rahab. And so he has a conversation with her and says, hey, look, we know they went into your house. Where are they? She has a decision to make. She has a decision to make. She has a step to take. What would it be? Would it be a step that says, I want to honor and gain favor in the sight of my king? And the sight of a king that's seen other countries come and go and try to take our walls, try to take our city and have failed? A king who conquers anyone who dares set foot against them in their walled city? Or do I take a step and do something for these 2 foreigners I've never met a day in my life and paid for a room for a night in my prostitution house? What a set of options. So she takes them to the roof, not the king. She takes the 2 guys to the roof, and she puts them under a bunch of stuff she stores on her roof and hides them. She goes to the king, and she's like, hey, here's the deal. I saw them, you're right, they came to my house. They hung out in my house. And then when they were done with what they do in my house, they left. And they ran off this way, and she sends them on a goose chase, wild goose chase. Like they're going the opposite direction. They're not there, they're still on the roof. They believe her. They have no reason, like, oh, of course, this prostitute makes her living. But like what has she got to gain? So they go chasing off after these guys that ran in a direction they didn't go, and they're still sitting on the roof. So she goes back up to them, and she has this conversation with the guys on her roof. Joshua chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. This is Rahab talking. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. So first, she starts with the Red Sea. She's like, look, we done heard what happened when y'all came out of Egypt. Like, I've been to the Red Sea. I've seen it on Instagram. I follow people who go there. I know what that's like. You can't just walk across the Red Sea. She's like, we heard about it. We know. We know that's a miracle. So whoever this Lord is, if he said he's giving you the land, just that story alone makes us tremble. And then she gets into two other cities. Two smaller cities, but equally feared in terms of going to battle face to face. He mentions two kings, King Sihon of Heshbon, an aggressive, militarized, known for refusing passage across his land to any foreigner. Israel peacefully requested to pass. He decided to go to war with them, and he got his butt kicked. King Og of Bashan, he was the last of what we call the Rephaim. We don't have a height for him. What we do have recorded, evidently his bed was pretty special, and it was 13 feet long, a little over 13 feet long, and that's what's recorded, like when they put his little obituary together about we kicked his tail too, and his bed was 13 feet long. Evidently this guy was huge. And so look at, when we think about intimidation, they think about those two kings, and y'all just wiped the floor with them, and the Red Sea deal, and now you're here at our place? Yeah, no, we can see the writing on the wall. This is yours. Israel was a people who had lived in slavery for 400 years and that had spent the last 40 years just walking in circles in the desert. Who does that unless you got serious issues? Just round and round they go. And yet that group of people destroyed both of those cities. And sure enough, did walk across on dry ground. And news traveled fast. And then she gets to this quote. I'm going to quote her. Now, when I read this to you, I don't want you to read it like, okay, this is just another part of the story. I want you to read it and ask this question. What do I need, what work or questions do I need to do or have or say in my life for me to be able to say the same thing Rahab says? So there could be, I don't know what the thing is for you, but what is it missing in your life that keeps you from being able to say this? For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. She's saying, look, I've heard of gods that are gods in the heavens, right? Maybe it's like Mount Olympus, right? They sit up there and they do God things and they never concern themselves with earth. They're just gods of heaven. But your God is different. He's God in heaven and he's God here. That's a different thing than what we're used to dealing with. There's something significant about the guy that you're following, the Lord that you've given your life to, the God that leads your nation. There's something different about it. And it's that there's a heavenly piece to this, but there's also a very earthly interest in it. What would it take for you to be able to say the same thing with conviction? My guess is there's probably a few questions that sit in your head. And those questions or the lack of answers to those questions would be what keeps you from taking a step in that direction. What if this Christmas you made a decision to say those questions out loud instead of just thinking them from time to time? What if you just decided to get serious about the questions that plague you? And instead of letting them plague you when you happen to go to church or you happen to see a Christian, that you actually just get serious about your own questions and say, why am I sitting around and not trying to chase an answer down? Why not take your own personal faith serious enough and do yourself a favor and answer, or at least attempt to find answers to your own questions? We have a phone number that you can find on Google, and you can text that number anytime with your questions. Anytime. Now, we don't respond in real time all the time because sometimes your questions are complicated, right? And it takes a minute for us to like, okay, well, we got to get an answer. And I can't just say, well, just because. And you're like, because why? Because I said so. Like, that doesn't work. It only works with your kids, right? It doesn't work with my kids, but it works with your kids, right? So it takes a minute. Now, a lot of times, if there is an answer, maybe the answer is in a resource or a video, or maybe it's a sermon series we've done previously. We'll get the link, we'll send it to you and say, hey, the answer's in here. Just watch this. Is from a year and a half ago. We answered this exact question. Or sometimes, here recently, we've gotten questions, and it's not something I've taught on specifically or any of our guest speakers have taught on, and it's not a book that I have readily available or that I've personally read myself that I could recommend. Then I have to take the time and I go and I open up a Google Doc. I copy and paste your question into the Google Doc, and then I do the research, I cite the sources, and then I share the link with you in the Google Doc. And then you can read through it or make comments and ask more questions. Now, if everyone did that at the same time, it would take a little bit longer, but that's not where we're at. I'm just saying if you've got genuine questions, I'm just telling you, our staff would love to work on answers for you. Now, the answer might be, hey, I actually don't know the answer to this, and I don't know when I can find an answer. I've got to do a lot of work. That might be it, but we'll be honest with you. But the truth is, there's so many of you that have questions that are keeping you from having a genuine desire to be able to say this line right here and mean it for yourself. And all it would take is maybe 30 minutes of work for me, and I can do that for you. Or it might even be a question someone else had last week that I've already done the work for, and it's just a copy paste, and you can read it and say, okay, now I've got to wrestle with, is this trustworthy or not? So when will you take your own questions serious enough to try to find an answer? Stop sitting on them. Stop sitting with them. Stop being reminded of questions that don't have answers for you every time you come in contact with Jesus, and just say to yourself, well, if I had an answer to this, well, let's get an answer to that. Or at least find out there isn't an answer. And that might be true. But my guess is that most of your questions has an answer. You just got to put in some effort to get there. Maybe this Christmas should be a Christmas of questions and answers as much as it is wrapping paper and presents. When Rahab makes this declaration, she then asks, hey, I know this is a done deal and this place is yours. My ask is, since I took the risk and I hid you, will you protect me? Will you keep me safe? Will you spare my life? And so the spies look at her and say, yeah, we will. Here's what you got to do. When the time comes, bring your family, your kids, your friends, bring them, anyone that you want safe, bring them into your house. Anybody in your house untouched. But let them know, if they leave your house for any reason, if they leave your house, the blood is on their own hands. But if you stay in your house, we give you our word, they'll be safe. And then, to let everyone know where your house is, we want you to hang a crimson cord out the window. You see, her house was built into the wall of Jericho. And so when the army approached, they would see the crimson cord hanging out of her window, which then led her to the escape plan. Because it was out that window that she then lowered those two spies to the ground. They went off and spent about 3 days in the woods close by until the soldiers came back because they couldn't find them, and then they returned to Joshua. Once Joshua heard the news, they started heading that way with the army. They reached the walls of Jericho, and no doubt the first time the army sees the walls, they're like, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't know how we're getting over that thing. Like, I wasn't brushing up on my parkour skills in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, how are we getting over this, Joshua? And Joshua tells them, I would love to be there the first time Joshua stands in front of an army that just whooped 2 other kings rear end, by the way, that just took them to the woodshed. And then he stands up and says, all right, guys, here's the battle plan. Everybody get your stuff together. On day one, we're going to be real quiet. We're going to walk around the outside of these walls one time. And then we're going to come back and hang out in the camp. On day two, we're going to get all our stuff on. We're going to go up to those walls, and we're going to be real quiet. And we're going to walk around the walls one time. And then we're going to come back to camp and hang out. And we're going to do that for 6 days. 6 days, we put our stuff on. Silently, we walk around the walls of Jericho. And then after we're done with the lap, we come back and we hang out in the camp. And on day 7, they're like, oh, 7's a good number. Joshua, tell us what we're doing day 7. We're going to walk around 6 times, quiet. And on the 7th time, we're going to walk around the 7th time. I don't know what the plan is. I'm telling you what our plan is. On the 7th time, we are supposed to shout to the Lord and blow the horns with the priests, and God's got something special. That's all I can tell you. That's all I know. I can't imagine the soldiers like, okay, your plan is a walkathon. That's what you want us to do. Like, we're getting sponsorships for this thing. Like, every lap we get $1 from our family. Like, what are we doing? I don't know what it was like inside the city. The first day, the army of Israel show up, and Rahab's like, she can't yell too loud, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, spy, remember our deal? Like, that ain't gonna work. So I'm sure every once in a while, she's just going up there, she's just like, you know. And then the first time they start walking towards the city, like all armed and all those things, she's like, just, you know. I can't imagine the murmur that's happening in the city on day 7 when the rhythm changes, and instead of finishing up their lap and taking a right back to the camp, they keep walking a second time. And what people must have said, hey, they're walking around again, this is different. And the 3rd time, and the 4th time, and the 5th time, and maybe after the 5th time they start making fun of them, like, what are they doing? Like, they think their feet are just gonna erode away our foundation or something? They're just making like a dog track, you know, where your dog runs in the yard the same place over and over again? Like, is that what they're doing? Like, what is happening here? Maybe when the religious leaders put their trumpets to their lips, maybe the people on the wall just started to make fun of them. What are they going to blow at our walls? They're going to sing our walls to sleep. The people of God still had no idea. But as they finished their 7th lap, another miracle. As the shouts rang out across the valley and the horns blew, you could hear for a mile. The walls of Jericho came tumbling down. All except for this one. The one marked by a scarlet thread. A prostitute's home. A place of prostitution. Saved by a God of righteousness. Joshua gives instructions. Joshua chapter 6, verse 25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. So that's Joshua writing his book. And so he's writing to people saying, hey, you can go ask Rahab what it was like. She's still with us. But she didn't just live among them. Eventually, she actually became part of their family. We know this because Matthew writes a book. Last week, I told you all about why Matthew wrote that book, and so I won't go into that level of detail. But I'll just remind you that Matthew's sole purpose for writing his book that we find in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in the Bible, his sole purpose was to link Jesus as the Jewish answer to their looking for a Messiah for their entire history. Everything he wrote was to a Jewish audience, trying to convince them this is the guy. All of the writings and the prophets and the Torah, all of that writing in our history, all of it was pointing to this guy. And so his entire gospel, that's his point. And so when he puts together the lineage of Jesus, every single name that he includes in it has a purpose. And it points to what God is doing as he sets up the Christmas story. And in it, we find some interesting names. Matthew chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, the prelude to the Christmas story. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And then if you read just a couple of verses later, you find David. A guy, once again, one of the most famous guys in and out of the Bible. Few people have never heard of David and Goliath. Even if you are just a sports fan and have no Jesus knowledge whatsoever, that analogy is used so often when a football team from a powerhouse school plays a cupcake on opening weekend. It's a David versus Goliath matchup. That David that defines the lineage of Jesus, that Goliath and David, that King David, that defines the lineage of Jesus, just a few lines from a woman like Tamar, a prostitute like Rahab. And Matthew again takes the opportunity to not only make sure everyone knows who Jesus is and where he comes from, but he includes in the who and where the why. This is why we need Jesus. The why? Because Jesus allows a prostitute to become a protector, and then a protector to become a believer, and a believer to become a family member of the nation of Israel, and that family member to become the mother of Boaz, which eventually gives us King David. And David defines the bloodline of Jesus. In other words, life can change with one good next step. You see, Rahab wasn't living a righteous life when she had this opportunity. She was a prostitute running a prostitution ring in the city walls of one of the greatest cities, greatest fortified cities in the known world. And in that moment, as she was walking through that, she was not thinking about God. She wasn't thinking about righteousness. She wasn't trying to please God. She was trying to survive. She was trying to make a living. She was trying to make a way in a male-dominated society where women had almost nothing unless you were a prostitute by yourself. Like, that's what was on her mind. And in that moment, she had an opportunity to take a step. Honor the king, maybe get a leg up, or defy her king and find a new Lord. But a Lord she didn't know hardly anything about. Rahab didn't know the story of Moses. You know what she knew about Moses? Nothing other than there was a group of guys that crossed the Red Sea miraculously. She didn't even know the name Moses. She didn't know about Abraham for sure. If you would have asked her a million questions about the history of the people of God, she would have been able to answer 3. Which sea did they cross miraculously? Red Sea, heard that one. And which 2 kings did they take to the woodshed a couple weeks ago? Oh, I remember those 2. One guy had a huge bed. That's the only biblical trivia she knew. She knew nothing else. She didn't know the creation story. She didn't know Adam and Eve. She didn't understand Noah. She didn't know Tower of Babel. She didn't know any of those things. She didn't know Isaac. She didn't know Jacob and Eve. She didn't know any of those things. The only thing she knew, I met two guys whose God's interested not only in heaven but also earth. I think that's something I can give my life to. She didn't have an answer for a prostitution business. She didn't have an answer for the guys that had already paid for the night downstairs waiting on her. She didn't have an answer for any of that. You know, the only thing she had was one single, solitary, good step. And she didn't have answers for any other steps she had already planned. She just had one opportunity for one good step. Do I hide them and protect them? Or do I get a leg up and maybe get the favor of the king? And her life changed with one good next step. She sided with God. She protected his people. She tied the scarlet cord to her window. She trusted a God she barely knew. She didn't fix her whole life before she did it. She just made one good, faith-filled decision. And on top of that, God built for her an entire new life. But the truth is, a good next step is often a step of risk. Maybe people might look at it in your life as foolish or even dangerous. But God sees it differently. You see, when we take steps in our life, we oftentimes tie it to the size of the step. Let's put ourselves in Rahab's shoes and kind of you think of your own situation. We think through this and we're like, okay, if I do this, if I start to follow God, he probably has an opinion about my prostitution business. He probably has something to say about how I make my living. He probably has an opinion on what I should and shouldn't be doing with my life. That's a big step. If you decide to trust God, or in our sense, we would say, hey, we would trust Jesus. We think, man, that's a big step because now I've got to have an answer for all these other things. That's how we judge steps. But that's not how God sees steps in our life. No, we judge our steps by the size, and we get uncomfortable when the steps are really large. See, God judges your steps not by the size, but by the direction. And even a teeny tiny step, as long as it's in his direction, that's something he can work with. So you don't have to have all the answers to all your other questions or what you see as problems. The only thing you honestly need is direction. Which way do I take my step? One good step toward God can outrun a lifetime of missteps you thought would always define you. Rahab, for sure. You can't become a biblical scholar or take an Old Testament history class anywhere without the word Rahab and prostitute being synonymous with one another. But I will tell you this, Rahab would not stand in front of you today and deny it even for a moment. But she would wear it as a badge of honor. Maybe even a scarlet letter. As proof that God is good and redemption is possible. Rahab didn't become an ancestor of Jesus Christ overnight. She took one good step, which opened the door to the next right step, which opened the door to the next right step. To summarize for you again, a prostitute became a protector became a believer became a family member of Israel, A family member became the mother of Boaz, which eventually gives us King David, and King David defines the bloodline of Jesus Christ. And all of that began with one good next step. Your past may feel heavy. Your choices that you've made might feel disqualifying. Your reputation might honestly feel stuck. And your faith might feel really small. But I've got really good news for you today. God does not require every step from you today. Just one good next step. Maybe it's turning towards Jesus. Maybe it's asking for forgiveness. Maybe it's saying, I'm done doing this life alone. Or maybe it's trusting God with your life and stepping into baptism. Now again, your mind is going to go to the size of the step. And you're going to think, but I don't have an answer for how I handle this and how I handle this if I were to take a step towards Jesus. And I will remind you again, your next good step is not about perfection. It's about direction. And there's a huge difference in the two of those things. God doesn't assume you're going to be perfect. And if you're thinking, well, if he knew how messed up my life has been, he already knows. He already knows, and he's okay with it. Like, he understands the whole dynamic of your life. And the reason we know this is because he sent his only son to die on a cross for you. Because he knew just how much we would mess up. He knew about the prostitution ring that we would find in our own homes. He understood whatever it is, fill in the blank, that's happening. He already saw it in advance. You can't hide it from him. He's aware. And he's so aware, he gave his only son because he was so aware. So when you think through the idea of Merry Christmas, man, maybe it's about steps and not about presents. Presents are incredible. They shine us, they shine light, they point us to the goodness of God and blessings. Everywhere you go this season, you're going to see things that come out of the heart of Jesus. Whether it's a nonprofit trying to feed families who are food insecure, whether it's wrapping paper that's handed to you by an aunt or uncle, even if the gift inside is trash and garbage and you're taking it back the next day looking for a receipt. Either way, like the heart behind everything we do in Christmas, it comes out of an incredible place of Jesus. I mean, I even got a Christmas hat on. This isn't a Braves hat, by the way. It's just a Christmas hat. It's got a Santa Claus on it, a truck holding a Christmas tree. There's nothing that says Jesus on it, but I tell you this, there's not a single thing that exists on this thing without Jesus first. When we think through what we should be doing in the Christmas season, there's a huge list of things. But none of them get as important or to the level as you taking your next step with Jesus. But follow Rahab's lead. Don't try to figure it all out. Just try to figure out the direction. You can text the word begin, 678-661-6330 at any point and just say, hey, I need to take a step towards Jesus. Baptism, when we look at the New Testament, when people make a decision at the very beginning, it's their first step. When they say, hey, I believe, and they say that out loud to someone, they're like, hey, I believe, or confessing, I believe. Like over and over again, when we read the narrative, the very next thing that happens to them is they're baptized the way Jesus was baptized. What a simple next step. One where you don't have to have all the answers. But it sure does bring new meaning to Merry Christmas. I would encourage you to think through, if you're not ready to find the direction because you've got questions that need answered, why are you not giving those questions more importance in your life? Ask them. Let's see what we can come up with together. But if there are no questions, and you're just trying to go back and forth on the size of the step because you don't have answers for what you're going to do with this in your life, why not say, Jesus, I don't have an answer, but I want to take a step in your direction. Will you help me find an answer to what I don't have an answer for in my life, like the prostitution ring still downstairs? He has an answer for that. He can help you find an answer for that. He can help you do the cleanup that you think you need to do before you come to Jesus. Why would we not want him to be a part of the cleanup process? You think he's embarrassed to walk downstairs and find the people waiting on you in their beds? No. Because he died for them too. And if you let him be a part of your cleanup story, maybe a few others will find it, and maybe they'll follow you as well.